Welcome to the East of England's Psychological Professions Network, the Spotlight on Psychological Professions project, a project we run monthly to raise awareness on the 12 psychological professions. And this month we're looking at CAPT, Child and Adolescent Psychotherapist. My name is Alina Croitoru and I'm an assistant psychologist for East of England PPN. And I'm here today with Jonathan Bowden-Howell, who is CAPT and who kindly agreed to share with us some of his own experiences. Thank you, Jonathan, for joining us. If you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
So thank you. As you said, my name is Jonathan Bowden-Howell. I'm a child and adolescent psychotherapist, and I currently work for Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust. And I work in a Tier 4 adolescent inpatient unit, which is known as the Dragonfly unit, which involves working as part of a large multidisciplinary team, including psychiatrists, nurses, psychologists, occupational therapists, teachers, and nursing support workers. And it involves quite a wide range of things, including supporting the team, lots of consultation, as well as individual work with young people and some group work. It was quite a journey, I have to say. So prior to training as a child and adolescent psychotherapist, I had previously trained as a mental health nurse and had worked in several inpatient units for adolescents of different specialisms. And it was on one particular unit in South London where there was a child psychotherapist working, and we just had a very brief conversation. That person might not even remember having a conversation with me, but it intrigued me as to what a child psychotherapist is. So I did some homework, and I'd been thinking about further training about what route that I'd want to take, and nursing was a very good foundation to use. Mm-hmm. And I suppose the more that I learnt, particularly from our professional website, the Association of Child Psychotherapists, about what a child psychotherapist does and how you can train, it sort of spurred me on to train. And so I tried to then start the preclinical part of our training. We have to do a 2-year preclinical master's or postgrad diploma. I had to stop that for personal reasons, but then retook it later and was able to do that as part of attaining a training post in the southwest of England. So I then did the very rigorous, long, but very enlightening 6-year training, 2 years preclinical, and then the 4-year clinical doctorate. And I studied at the Tavistock, and I completed my training 2 years ago. I mean, I did my homework on what it was, but I think as much kind of reading and understanding about not only the role of what a child psychotherapist is, but what it involves in being able to train, because of the different parts to the training that includes having your own personal analysis, having an idea and an understanding of all of those things, and how much how much you get from it, but also how much it demands from you is helpful. But I say all of that knowing that you can't truly understand how much it demands of you until you're in it. But you can prepare yourself as best as you can. But yeah, there were some very helpful open evenings that I did go to at the Tavistock, and I think having conversations with as many people as possible, if there are child psychotherapists around, or if there are people who have trained psychoanalytically, then as much information as you can get would be helpful. So prior learning doesn't mean that you have to do any less in the training as a child psychotherapist, but prior learning is a prerequisite of being able to train. So yeah, part of the essential criteria that will be spelled out on the ACP's website is having previous experience of working with children and adolescents, and that can be from a really wide range of backgrounds. It can be in a more clinical setting, like a hospital, as a nurse or an allied health professional, but it can also be from a social work perspective. It can be from a children's home or a nursery worker perspective. It can also be from, I suppose, substance misuse. From there are, I know, plenty of teachers that trained as child psychotherapists. So I think any experience of working with children and families and adolescents is helpful and almost essential to the training. I think you need to have some professional background and some experience before training. I suppose from my point of view, what psychotherapy and psychoanalysis really provides is an understanding. And what I mean by that is a very deep understanding of the child's internal world and all the factors at play within that internal world that are happening right now in the present day, but have some relevance in the past, and have some relevance in the nuances of relationships that have developed over the years that might seem very subtle and hard to focus on, but can emerge in very prominent difficulties. So I suppose it's not only an understanding, but it's a shared understanding, in that you might be the clinician who has an understanding of psychoanalytic theories and child development and the role of unconscious mental processes, but you're also guided by the child and the family and how they respond to your thoughts on what might be going on that might confirm or deny. And in that way, it then becomes a shared learning experience that you might develop a formulation or an understanding, but you build on it over time, and that will change over time depending on how the treatment goes. One thing I really like about psychotherapy is that the application is quite broad. So quite a wide range of young people and families can access it. It doesn't need to be for specific conditions or so on. How we work with specific conditions, it can vary slightly in what your approach might be. But so I suppose the main thing is recognition of there being a particular struggle, that there is this area in life, whatever it might be, however big, however small, that this feels like a problem, and it is impacting me in my ability to have relationships and sustain relationships, or to go to school, or to be able to concentrate. I suppose, yeah. And that can be, it can be a very small recognition, it can be a very huge recognition, and think that everything is a problem. Yeah. But I suppose a recognition of something that would be helpful for it to be different. I would say very involved, in that in the way that we're trained. It might sound a bit crude or a bit simplistic, but children are never children on their own. Children exist in the context of a family and need a family or a system of some kind around them to help them function and to support them and so on. So you wouldn't start a treatment with a child unless there were very special circumstances around it. You wouldn't start until you've had a conversation with the parent or the carer or who is kind of responsible and taking an active role in that young person's care. And you'd also think about the parent accessing some sessions on their own with a colleague in order to help them with their process of the child's difficulties and how that impacts on them as a parent, but also how it can resonate with their experiences as a child themselves many years before. And at points during a piece of therapy, then you would have regular reviews, and that would involve having the parent or family and child together to think together about, I suppose, not just about the treatment, you would think about that, but generally speaking, a bit of an update about what might have changed in that whole process of time that's gone on whilst the child and the family have been in therapy, if that makes sense. And you would do that as collaboratively as you could. I suppose to say I'm very passionate about working for the NHS, and I think it has the real advantage of the NHS is that it's a free at point of entry service. So you don't need to have money to pay for something, and the amount of money you have doesn't or shouldn't affect the access that you have to any given treatment. And so that can help a dynamic where, for example, I suppose if you were seeing somebody in private treatment where they were funding it, then it changes the relationship, that there is money exchanging hands, and it changes the dynamic in terms of being able to agree on treatment and length and so on. Whereas if it's a free to entry system, then it means that that's a bit more neutral and you've got a bit more freedom. But I'll come back, I'll put the freedom with a bit of a inverted commas or it, because I suppose working for the NHS, it's there are very real pressures, and you know, everybody will be familiar with all of the kind of media coverage around pressure not only on children's services, particularly perhaps on child and adolescent services in some articles, but on mental health services in general. So it means that resources can be very stretched, and that can affect how many children or families are able to access treatment at any one time, and also how long you can see them. You know, it has an influence on treatment length as well. So that negatively affects the freedom. So yeah, there are pros and cons for both. You know, it's a situation that we all have had to survive into and make the best that we can, and but that doesn't mean that it hasn't come with huge sacrifice. You know, I don't even need to say that. We all know about the sacrifices that we've had to do, and it's meant that child psychotherapy has had to be very creative in being able to continue treatment and engaging children and families. And I suppose where with a lot of therapies, it's the case, particularly in child psychotherapy, the relationship is the most fundamental part, the therapeutic relationship, I mean, between the therapist and the young person or the family. And it creates all manner of barriers when you can't be in a room together. But even when you are able to be in a room together, then there are barriers such as masks and personal protective equipment. And I suppose even in the cases where they're not there, they're still around in our everyday life. So those barriers become psychological barriers that we carry with us, that mean that how free we are in a session to make connections that's impacted upon. I suppose, for example, I'm just thinking about how we use our bodily senses in psychotherapy. We obviously use thought processes and verbal interactions, but you can never discount the feeling that you might get when somebody says a particular phrase or a turn of phrase or a word use or something, and it would evoke a feeling in you that might be quite bodily, that you would then think about and try and articulate back to whoever you're with. And when you're not in the same room, you would really struggle to have those kind of sensations that enhance the clinical work that you do. So I think meaningful work can still be done, because contact and continuity and regularity are the really fundamental things as part of a successful psychotherapy treatment or intervention, and those things can still continue. So I think, again, maybe a bit like your last question, that there is pros about being able to continue, but also being mindful of the deficits that you have to live with whilst working this way. I think I was going to say it's important to work as part of a team, but it's not important. It's vital, because no one professional or individual holds all the knowledge, and that you have your own area of knowledge and your own area of understanding, and you can learn more about even your own understanding from the things that other people say, even if they're trained in a completely different way. And you use your collective minds to think together about, even if a treatment's going well, why might it be going well? And if it's going wrong, then if it's not going as you'd hoped, then what might be the factors? And just being part of a team, especially when you're working with the most complex and risky children, which NHS services do now, particularly with the pandemic and people being locked down in their homes a lot. It's exacerbated a lot of problems, and it's kind of compounded some already very difficult relationships when you're kind of locked in that way. So having different approaches and different people thinking together, it can only be an advantage. I suppose what a child psychotherapist can bring that's different, I suppose, like I said, that every therapeutic intervention works on the relationship in some ways, but perhaps where ours is different is that it is 100% central, and that's what you use in your thinking in every session, and you're learning in every session, and so we bring a different perspective on how the child presents, but also being able to highlight their internal world and the conflicts that they have with other people, but within themselves, and what happens to the problem areas of their life. Do they become externalized? Do they become internalized? Are they kind of put out and located in other people? I think that those are our real strengths, and I say all of that because we sometimes we can make a rod for our own back where we use terms like projection and so on, and not, some people might not understand that. So it's about sort of being able to say those types of things, but in an accessible and collaborative way. A large part of our training is done in groups, thinking about specific problem areas such as looked after children or working with autism or adolescents or something. And you always you work and you learn it in a discussion group. So I think working alongside other psychotherapists, it's kind of engendered from training and onwards. So I think maybe a bit like all of us, or from birth, we're kind of born to relate, in the words of Graham Music, a really famous child psychotherapist. And I think that the child psychotherapy training builds on that idea, if you know what I mean. And I think it's really useful to do that, because we're not a very large profession. There's about 1,000 of us. And depending on where you are in the country, we might be everywhere, particularly in London, where the bigger training schools are located, or there are other training schools in Leeds and in Scotland. But then in more remote areas, then we have very few numbers. So, I mean, my training placement was in Cornwall, and there were a few of us there covering the county, and I've since moved to Norfolk, and over here in East Anglia, in Norfolk and Suffolk, we are really, really very small in numbers. So I've had to be more active in seeking out people of the same profession and making connections in that way. That what's been helpful is there are it was the same in Cornwall as it is here, that there's kind of a regional group of psychotherapists that are independently run, and it would one or two sort of local psychotherapists would take up the organisation of it. So there's a really good East Anglian psychotherapy network that covers Cambridgeshire, Essex, Norfolk and Suffolk. And there was something similar for Cornish psychotherapists. So I think just being as creative as you can in making connections, you know, we obviously have to have clinical supervision in order to maintain our registration. So I've got a connection with a psychotherapist in Cambridge who provides clinical supervision, and that also then provides some networking opportunities to other psychotherapists that might be in that kind of area. So yeah, I suppose in a very simple way, connection is key. To start off with, just thinking on the lines of clinical supervision, I know it's a bit more professional than personal, but it's completely vital in being able to understand more about the work. You know, you might have a particular session or the course of work with a particular young person or family where you feel very strongly emotionally affected by what's happening in the work, and having supervision helps you to digest that so that you're not sitting with it yourself. Yes, I suppose on the theme of connections, I think I found it helpful just, you know, to keep connections in very normal ways, you know, to keep connections with friends and family, and just finding things that you really love, that we would advocate for anybody, really, you know. I'd love being outside, and I'd love taking my dog for a walk, and just being out in nature, exercising regularly, all those kinds of things. They might not feel like self-care, because that you might feel like you have to push yourself to do them, but they pay off. It's a good question, and it's kind of, I find myself feeling a bit mixed about it, because I suppose in some ways the picture at the moment can feel quite bleak, in that there's lots of campaigning, not just from child psychotherapy's point of view, but from lots of other professions, about the state of services at the moment and how we can improve them. So I suppose in that sense that there's quite a hard road in being able for services to change and to have more access and more equitable access to treatment like child psychotherapy, amongst others. And I suppose I would just like to see that happen. I'd love to see growth happen. I'd love to see more of us around here, but more of us, spread across the country. And I suppose we can do that by supporting one another and being part of the East of England network.